Hello, and welcome to the video version of the History of CAD podcast. Last time we spoke, you were going to enjoy some art.
I've been doing a lot of that. I've been here in Europe. We've got very long, relaxing vacations. So I spent some time in Basque Country in Spain and had two. It was a San Sebastian's known for its beach and for its amazing tapas called pinchos. It was raining like crazy for 2 days. So we ended up renting a car and driving to Burgos, which has a very famous, beautiful Gothic cathedral. And next door, there's a monastery called Miraflores. Both of them are UNESCO monuments. The next day, we drove to Bilbao to see the Guggenheim and just experience that town, which was it's a beautiful town. I had a stretch of bad luck because I rented the car in a very dark garage, drove out in the pouring rain, and as soon as the sun came out, I noticed a crack in the windshield. Obviously, Avis is going to say it's my fault. There's no way I would have seen it in a dark garage or in the pouring rain. They charged me $1,200. I put in a claim to my Visa, hoping they're going to cover it. That was the only disagreeable aspect. Everything else has been great. We went to Pau and we spent a couple of days in Toulouse, and then we went to Marseille. Yesterday, we went up to Arles, which is a really fantastic city. They have a 6-month festival every year of photography. Like every single public or religious building, there's a photo exhibit. It was really awesome. I hadn't realized that it lasted so long and that it was so big, but it's become a really huge local event.
This is turning out to be quite interesting. You already turned into one of my most interesting guests.
One of your interesting guests who got a second time on Thomas Algayer's Best of LinkedIn list on smart manufacturing. So that made me pretty happy.
Oh, okay. LinkedIn bio. You're at the 1% of all LinkedIn?
I think 1% is defined as 10 or 12,000 followers, and I've actually passed the 20,000 mark. I'm at like 20,350, something like that.
Okay.
Aiming very pointedly at a Lionel Gray. Leo, watch out, man. I'm coming behind you.
It must be the top in our industry.
I think Lionel is number one at 26,000. Oleg is just behind me at 20,200, and I'm number two at 20,000. But then you've got some Indian guys that have bigger followings, but I think that maybe slightly less experience to speak from.
Yeah. Yeah, you've really taken to LinkedIn. That's where I first took notice of you. We've been in the industry for quite some time, but for me, it seemed like you burst upon the scene at LinkedIn and suddenly you were everywhere. And I'm not just talking about half thought out, half baked quotes. I'm talking about full articles with graphs and charts. And I'm like, where does this guy come from? I'm thinking, why is he not in publishing? And I find out you've been actually immersed in the CAD industry, right?
I started doing graphics adapters back when there were graphics adapters that weren't made by NVIDIA, but it was a long time ago. In fact, I saw a lot of the articles you're referring to. I've written about the history of CAD and the history of PDM, what became PLM. I was realizing and trying to prove that our industry is really responsible for the rise of AI rather directly, because the math that was required to do the rendering of the 3D models for the Boeings and the Airbus and the Lockheeds was driven by CAD software, by Pro-E, CATIA, and graphics at the time, which is now X. And of course, SolidWorks, the whole Windows revolution with SolidWorks, Solid Edge, and now Autodesk Fusion and Onshape. Had those applications not made so much demand on the hardware before the Windows workstation became usable in around 1999, 2000 with the 486 and 586 chips. Before that, it was IBM, Sun. I was working for HP and IBM at the time. And then, of course, everybody's favorite was SGI with the most beautiful machines, the purple ones. They're pretty awesome. We were all jealous.
Oh, yeah, the Iris workstation?
Yeah, the Iris workstation. Well, Irix was their flavor of Unix, right? It was Irix.
Okay.
Was it Iris or Irix? No, I think it was Iris. HPUX, AIX, Sunus or Solaris, and then there was Irix. And there was DEC. DEC had their own too, right?
DEC had some.
But the demands we were making on graphics cards meant that we had to create new chips to deal with these operations en masse. And those same chips then were started being mass produced by companies like Elza, but especially another smaller one called NVIDIA, who created the GeForce, which was the revolutionary card back in 1997. So 3 or 4 years before Quake and Doom and all these games, the biographers of our friend Jensen Huang would like to say were at the origin of this. Actually, several years before that, he'd already created the GeForce specifically for these CAD applications. And without the GPU, without that technology, we wouldn't be where we are today with Gen AI and MCPs and all that stuff. So I like to think that we had a much larger role to play than perhaps people are trying to say these days.
A little bit of unknown history that it was actually CAD that was behind NVIDIA's success, not the gamers.
Initial success. Of course, they exploded after that with gaming, but they wouldn't have created the GPU initially had it not been for the needs of CAD and for rendering in general. For when we wanted to create a realistic view of the Porsche Taycan, which was done on with this NURBS-based thing, we had to the computers were just too slow. So we had to create new chip structures, the graphical processing unit to process the graphics so that we could in real time see the car or the airplane.
So
That's how now we're doing even that in the browser, right? We've got web CPU and WebGL that are all doing that natively in a browser, which is just mind-blowing thinking of the size of the machines I had to use 30 years ago. I've done a lot of research into engineering startups, and there's a really awesome one out of Hungary, out of Budapest. Van Cassidy is the founder of Shaper 3D. He realized when he first got an iPad, what, 2015, 16 is what I think the first ones came out. He realized how powerful it was. And he said, I could use Open Cascade, but why? I think there's actually a binding for iOS. So he contacted Siemens and got Parasolid on there, and he created this awesome CAD application running on an iPad. Weighs a couple of grams. You can put it in your suit jacket pocket if you got to watch. But it's incredible how far we've come in 30 years.
Tell me this, my red letter day in CAD was when the Boeing 777 came out. It was the first aircraft created on a CAD. That was with TIA.
Yeah, and VPM.
Where were you when that was happening?
The 777 would have been the mid 90s, right? Mid 90s, I was finishing school in 93 and then joining IBM for a couple of years. In 90s, I would have been moving to France. And when they were creating a V5, initially called Cenex, the V4 used for the 777 was more or less just solid modeling, doing Boolean operation of solids, but they also added exact surfaces, mathematical surfaces that they could put on top of a facet rather than just a flat surface. So that was, I think they called it, I'm not remember, doesn't matter. They had a name for the kernel, which was just the direct modeling, and then it was the E-solids, the exact surfaces. And then Pro-E came out, right? Pro-E comes out in 1995. They make more money than God. They're basically printing money in the basement in Waltham. And parametric modeling, everybody's mind blower. And that's so we ought to build a model and do both because there's people that want to do direct. They want to be able to control their surface. And there's other ones, and they were playing with it, and he thought the ergonomy was terrible. And it was true. If you remember the early ergonomy, as awesome as it was, the ergonomy was not great. You had to be a god of using your mouse in kilometers. Probably lots of people had arthritis and joint problems after that. But basically, they wanted to fix the ergonomy of it while maintaining having both the parametric modeler and a direct modeler. And I think they can, with great validity, claim the world's first hybrid kernel doing both parametric and direct modeling. It was a couple of years after that they did the same thing in NX that they called it, was it convergent modeling? No, it was No, I think convergence when they did the surfacing plus I think it's just called hybrid, right? Or something.
Yeah,
I'm sorry?
Point tessellated models and
no, convergent modeling that did a couple of years back. They merged their direct modeling and that they had from ideas and Unigraphics to the parametric modeling that Unigraphics could do. And I'm trying to remember the name of it. It was a hybrid. They were the second ones to do it. And they put that inside, of course, Parasolid. So all these companies that bought Parasolid as a kernel were able to use it. Yeah, it was pretty. So it was a cool times. I was there when they were creating CNEX, and they were actually learning C++ as they were designing it, which is crazy, right? To learn the language as you're designing software. I talked to another guy, Jack, one of the EVPs at Capgemini. Jack said he remembers that being at a table. I think he said there was of course Bernard Charlet. It might have been Didier Bourdieu, although there was some debate whether he was at DS already or not. But they were basically sitting around a table looking at this thing. Do we take Kit V4 and Tran and just fix things and add stuff to it? Or do we start completely fresh with C++? And basically the two other guys at the table were like, and Thackeray, he claims to be the one that's told Bernard, no, Bernard, we need to start all over. We go C++. And that was the decision. And that was history being made right there, right?
Bernard Charles is a key figure in the history of CAD, no question. Did you have opportunity to work closely or directly with?
Yeah, I was working at Dassault from 2010 after IBM acquired Dassault acquired the IBM branch of PLM in 2010 and the Turinga project. And I was at DS until 2017. So I didn't see Bernard all the time, but everybody knew who he was in the hallways. But when we started thinking about 3DEXPERIENCE platform, he had this marketing woman named Monica Menghini who made a huge impact on the industry herself. I got to know Monica and I got to work on that team that was conceptualizing what a platform, a unified platform for Dassault Systems would look like that could unify the user experience, all the brands of Dassault Systems. Then what does the messaging look like? How would we go after the various industries we want to consider? And that was the whole refoundation of Dassault around 2012 to 2015, basically from ground up of saying, okay, we need a unified user experience. And instead of saying Innovia V6 is the platform and an app, Novia is an app, and V6 is a platform, except V is a letter and 6 is a number, meaning 5 wasn't that great and 7 will be better. So we got rid of that and called it 3DEXPERIENCE, which was just the name of the platform. And then we said, okay, each brand will have apps on the platform, and rather than selling apps, they sell a role like mechanical designer, which has a little bit of CATIA, but a little bit of Novia for data management and so on. It was a pretty huge change. I presented to Bernard once in the XCOM meetings on the user interface of Innovia, which was not anybody's favorite interface. That went pretty well. Of course, I was in a couple of meetings he was there, but yeah, I got to interact with him a bit. He was a character. He was turbulent. He was just as charismatic as he came off in public, I'd say. And very well loved by the employees. No place is ideal to work for, but in DS, you did, particularly when Bernard was there, you did feel like you had a purpose. You were working on a mission and you were going to change the world in a positive way. It was an interesting place to be.
Very learned and quite a visionary. He has a PhD in mechanical engineering, I believe. Very well respected.
Which is interesting about the generation of CEOs in PLM, right? Because he's the generation when we had Tony Affuso at the head of what became UGS and then was sold to Siemens as Siemens PLM, and now it's Siemens Digital Industry Software, a mouthful. But that was Tony, and then you had at PDC had James Heppelman, who comes from SDRC.
Yep.
He and John Gibson decide that it's dumb to write stuff in C. We need a neutral language. It's easier to port. So why don't we just rewrite metaphase in Java? And so they do that, and they try to find a name. They're in Minnesota. It's super cold, so they call it wind chill factor. CV, of course, computer vision at the time is flailing in terms of PDM and PLM. They did PDM relatively well, but the UI was awful. I don't think I've seen a worse user experience in my life than OpTrigger was. CADS was a great product. We had a separate executable for the parametric and a separate one for direct, and it was a bit of a mess. In fact, I talked to Scott Harris, who created all that. Scott was telling me, yeah, it was just such a mess of code. It was just keep throwing stuff in and hoping it worked. CV saw this startup in Minneapolis and buys them more or less simultaneously as PTC buying CV. And there's an interesting thing there because there's a debate on whether did PTC buy CV because they wanted the software, and I would say not really. I think they wanted the end to Airbus and Hyundai Heavy Industries and all these huge customers that CV was able to get. I think that was the main thing they were trying to get. And Windchill. I think they wanted the portfolio because they put CADs on life support immediately. It was more or less a dead end at that point. And of course, it was never anybody's favorite system. It was more or less the only thing that you had if you wanted to do big stuff at the time. Interesting piece of history.
I want to go back to about 3DEXPERIENCE. And you were, is it correct to say you were the father of 3DEXPERIENCE?
No, I couldn't.
You know, would it bother you to know people are still wondering what that is?
What 3DEXPERIENCE is? I'm sure it's too long. It's a very long name. I did mention to Monica at a user conference that V6 was a terrible name for a platform, and they weren't even using it correctly because they were making people buy CATIA and then they had to buy Innovia too. At one point, Daimler-Benz was a huge customer of Dassault Systems, but Daimler said, we don't want Innovia. We like Teamcenter. We love CATIA, but we love Teamcenter. And Bernard said, no, if you're going to use CATIA, you have to have Innovia. And they couldn't agree. And so Daimler said, okay, fine, we're out of here. I remember it was a radical decision, and it really ticked off Bernard because Bernard would leave his car parked in front of the front office of Dassault. He had a high-end Mercedes. We'd sit there in the AC, 65 degrees out, in case he had to go to the airport or whatever. And that car, mysteriously after this Daimler decision, disappeared and was replaced by an XJS4 Jaguar, like almost immediately. And I had to turn in my company car, which was a Class B Mercedes, to take a BMW or Volkswagen because Daimler was no longer an acceptable car to drive.
Grata, or whatever the equivalent is for automobiles.
So we were at a conference, and Monica had given this speech with the industry approach. She said what's important is solving business problems, not just selling licenses to software. We need to solve problems that businesses have. To do that, we need to understand each industry, aerospace, we ended up calling it mobility and transport for automotive, but also includes trains. For industrial equipment, the big three, and then you've got shipbuilding and energy. We wanted to sell solutions rather than just software. And she created an entire organization with the vice president of an industry and a whole organization of people that were creating these solutions. And the brands, I was in the Inovia brand at the time, we all felt threatened with that. Oh my God, she's going to kill us. She's going to destroy the brands. The brands are going to disappear. So they had a conference in Las Vegas. They had this I love you mass, basically. All the brand people were invited in this room, and Monica came in front and she said, I still love you. Don't worry. We're all friends. We're just trying to do this because we need to be able to sell better. Right now, the CATIA guys hate the Inovia guys and they hate the Inovia guys. We are all on the same team. Our customers don't care about these internal rivalries. They want to buy software and fix their business problems. That's what we're trying to do here. The brands will always be there, but really they're what drives revenue, but what we need to sell is business solutions, right? As she walked out of that meeting, I said, Monica, we haven't met yet, but my name is Michael Finocchiaro. Isn't the problem, though, right now, the naming? Because we had this problem with Daimler. You guys said they wanted to buy, and you guys said, no, you have to buy CATIA plus Inovia. If you had said they want to buy CATIA, okay, fine, we'll sell you CATIA V6. And then you can connect CATIA V6 to Teamcenter. That would have been a different argument. It would have been less aggressive, a little less hardcore than saying, no, you have to buy Inovia. So I was the one who put the idea in Monica's mind that separate Inovia, the application doing PLM, from Inovia, the platform V6, and then everything else happens. I can't claim credit for the name. I can just say that I put a bug in her ear about maybe we ought to think about what a real platform is and what apps are instead of doing an amalgamation of everything in the same term, which nobody understands. And
yeah, you're responsible for a lot of the marketing and the 3D experience. I remember Monica when she first came onto the scene and we saw her on stage at a Dassault 3D Experience event. She was like nothing we as engineers and media, we never saw at a CAD conference. It was like
crazy, right?
she was not in our world, and she was just a presence around her. And she talked about the experience, not so much the usage of CAD, but the experience of it. Like everyone lives for the experience. I think she likened it to Starbucks, if I'm not mistaken.
That was one of her favorite analogies.
Yes.
At the time, if you're going to rename it, of course, you're going to have to say 3D because it's Bernard and everything that Bernard did was 3D. So the number 3 and the letter D had to be in there next to each other, preferably. What you have to remember is that coincides when Joe Pine published The Experience Economy, which was the business book of the day. At the time, all the cool kids in the business world were reading this experience economy thing. So basically, Monica and Bernard took that to heart and said, 3D experience, we want to create experiences. And that's probably what she said at your conference. She said, the customer doesn't care about buying the software. The customer ultimately wants their customer to have a superior experience during their flight, during their taxi ride, during making a coffee. That's why she talked about Starbucks. She said, why do people spend $4 or $5 on a cup of coffee when you can get one for $2? Because of the Starbucks experience. You have a barista smiling at you, asking what your first name is. The whole place feels very comfortable. Nobody's smoking, but it's really nice and convivial. You can sit down for a while. Nobody's going to tell you to leave because we need that table. It was an experience. That's why she was using that Starbucks example. And that's why the platform is called 3D Experience, because they were trying to pitch this idea of let's sell your customer's customer. And I noticed that I went to Oracle Open World about that time for 2 or 3 years in a row. Awesome concerts back in the day. I think that year I saw the Black Keys, and then another year I saw Aerosmith. That was awesome. But Oracle was also using that same idea in their customer experience stuff. In fact, I even created a class for DSI based on a class I took at Oracle Open World, which was walking your customer's shoes, creating the experience of your experience, and then looking at your products and where they interact with the customer and a particular interaction, finding the pain point, and then saying, okay, why don't we fix that part of the experience? Because suddenly we'll be able to talk to that customer more intimately in terms of fixing that particular problem, right?
She came from a more creative world, I would say.
Procter and Saatchi and
Saatchi and Saatchi, right.
If the person cleaning your house, whether that's you or your wife or a cleaning person, if they have a Swifter in their arsenal, that was 100% Monica's idea. She came up with the idea, the branding, the color, the marketing strategy. 15 years ago, that was $2 billion of revenue for Procter & Gamble.
Lady behind the Swifter, interesting. What do you think our legacy is?
I think it's more the industries. It was the industry approach. She wasn't technical at all. She was absolutely not technical. She was very much cut through all the BS and get right to the point. That every meeting with her was more or less, okay, I don't want to hear the blah, blah. Just who are we selling to? What are we selling? What are the paths to profitability down those different things?
Okay. But how hard of a fit was that? Because I got the impression that most everybody else at Dassault Systems is very much technical.
It was a rub. She left in 2018 because it was a challenge. There was a lot of rivalry between R&D, which is its own unique center of power in DS. She was potentially a second locus of power, and so there was a bit of a power struggle. It wasn't easy, although I think people came around to understanding the revolution she did and appreciating it, but there were moments of tension because people were, who is this person? Why is she so outlandish? And why is she dressed like that? Sometimes they would just look at her rather than think about what she was saying, because what she was saying was really interesting and important.
Some of the things that happened, and tell me if this is not during that era, but I recall campaigns meant for the world, not just CAD
Yep.
people, but it was ice being towed across the ocean, things like that.
That was another well, so Monica hired a company and they're on the Docklands in London, right on the Thames. They're called the Frameworks. So it was basically the guys at the Frameworks that came up with the if we idea. And so I guess what the lesson there is the fact that she didn't rely on the internal people that were doing the same marketing stuff for the last 20 years at Dassault. She went outside, found a very experienced outside publicity company to redesign the advertising and democratize the message into the iceberg thing, the commercials, the stuff in the Wall Street Journal, the stuff in airports, because we also were on I think once or twice when I was walking to the airplane, SBC always has those cool. I think we had those once for 3DX for very briefly. So no, it was an interesting period because it was a lot of moving parts, a bit of a sea change in terms of the way Dassault even saw itself. And it coincided with the fact that Hunger had IBM to lean on because for their first 30 years, IBM was always there to pick up the pieces. IBM was doing all the marketing, all the service, all the go-to-market. So
Right.
Dassault had to pick all that up, figure it out, and then realize, hey, we've got all these things that don't talk to each other. What if they talk to each other? Wouldn't it be more powerful? And surprise, they're now worth $6 billion instead of 900 million, 7 8. So I think I put that on. I made a couple infographics. I think they went to 2 billion in 2017, 18.
Yeah.
It wasn't all just from acquisitions. It was also just for selling more.
Yeah.
A lot of TAV5, a lot of SolidWorks, but also the other industries because they sold the mega deal to Airbus of $1 billion. The first $1 billion PLM deal was them. I'm sorry, it was Boeing. That was the first $1 billion PLM deal. A friend of mine at Airbus confidentially told me that Airbus spends almost $1 billion a year just on service on all the software they have because they have a ton of Dassault software as well. Renault has, of course, made a huge investment with the Renault. I'm trying to remember the name. They give it some funny name, the Renault experience. Yeah, I think that whole industry approach is at least somewhat responsible for this incredible growth that they've experienced over the last 10 years.
Tell me about this. I want to confirm a story with you. And you're the perfect person to do this. It sounds like you're American by birth, but you moved to France a while back.
I'm from Miami originally, and I moved to France in 1996. I moved from IBM to HP because HP needed a guy to tune the graphics adapter for CATIA V5. So that's why I ended up in France.
How come you didn't pick up a French accent?
The
German
Americans
accent.
can't figure out where I'm from. They think I might be British or something because I don't have a very marked Florida accent. I don't say y'all and reckon all that much unless I'm home for a while. But when I speak French, I sound like an American. All the French, no French person's ever been fooled into thinking I was native French.
I've got to ask, how did the French accept you specifically, and how did they accept you specifically, and how did they accept an American company like SolidWorks? What was that? What were both absorptions
It's complicated. There's the French have they're a rather arrogant culture. They believe that they've got the best minds and the best history and the best literature and the best this and that. So as an American, it is not always easy, particularly when you're an opinionated American as myself. It wasn't always easy. You remember after SolidWorks was bought, Jeff Ray, the CEO, it only lasted about 6 months and he left. He couldn't stand it. Eric Swedberg, the American guy who runs North America for Dassault, he's been there for about 15 years and he's survived XCOM for that long. I haven't talked to Eric in a while. I knew him back in the day. But I think that's him and Monica might be the unique cases of people that were not French that survived in the oxygen deprived areas of the higher up levels at Dassault.
The story is that Bernard came and saw SolidWorks back when SolidWorks was just a little startup, practically no customers, and he bought them for what was then considered an enormous amount of money.
700 million, right? Or 600? I can't remember the number.
I think it was
the
260 sticks in my mind, less than 300.
Maybe 250.
It seemed like the French might fall in love. Seemed like that to me. And before they had much of a promise, fell in love with this young American company, and it then had to convince the board that this was going to be something. And now, of course, the irony is that it's one of the biggest revenue streams in one
Profit center.
year as the acquisition price of SolidWorks. What?
That's true. I wasn't there yet, but I heard the stories, and I've talked to Mike Payne, John Hirschtick, and Scott Harris. It was Bernard did fall in love with this idea. I don't think it was solely the software; it was also the extraordinary channel strategy that nobody else has ever done before. No direct sales; everything would go through the channel, and then we're going to have a very close relationship with those partners, and that nobody had ever done in the CAD industry. And that's really, besides the fact that it was
Autodesk did, but this was the first MCAD company.
You're right.
Yeah.
But in MCAD, it was SolidWorks that just knocked it out of the park.
PTC was selling directly with their own salespeople, but here comes SolidWorks is going to copy the AutoCAD Autodesk model and had do it through VARs, and VARs turned out to be the best salesman you could get for. And also they had a really good hardware and third-party network too. That was also just jumped in, started.
Once you got off of Unix and it was only Windows, then it was a lot easier than trying to get IBM to change AIX in order to get this bug. It was just Windows and then the graphics vendors. It was a lot easier, I think. In my book that I still haven't published, but I've been publishing article by article on LinkedIn, it was interesting as I talked to Mike and John about the origins of SolidWorks, and also Blake Quarter, but mostly with Scott Harris, who had the Geometry Hell book. Did he tell you about that?
Yes, yes.
So when they were creating Pro E, they were
actually, I think you told me about that, Fino.
probably did. So basically, John and Mike decided they wanted to do Pro E, but only on PCs because they knew that was where the market was going to go. And Scott said, "Okay, I want a really good modeler," so he created this notebook with these incredibly the most difficult problems, like how do you make this surface touch that surface with these different parameters on it. And he measured the ACIS kernel, which was the default. The sales guy was really pushy from the ACIS. Then they measured Parasolid. Since they were all ex-PTC, they had a copy of Pro E, and they measured Pro E. And Pro E actually won, but Scott said they were cheating. They could find places where they were cheating, like when the surface didn't touch, they would just extend the line a little bit. Even if they had wanted to use Granite, which was later the name, it wasn't even, there was no name. It was just, and in fact, Mike Payne told me it was never really a kernel. It was more of a engine. It was really hard it would have been hard to separate the graphics core from the rest of Pro E at the time. Nonetheless, Mike and Scott went back to Dick Harrison, who was running PTC, and asked to use the PTC kernel. He said, "No way, we don't sell that." They contacted Tony Fuso, Chuck Grindstaff, and Eugene, and said, "Hey, we love this Parasolid. Can we use it?" He said, "Sure." Tony Fuso said, "Yeah, we knew it was going to be competition, but we figured the kernel should just be plumbing. It shouldn't be a differentiator. It should just be the thing that allows people to have software that interacts." Because his problem was, I want all these different disciplines to be able to talk to each other. Tony was already thinking about MBSE and digital thread back in the 70s and 80s, before it wasn't even a thing. In parallel, over at Intergraph, they had also seen the writing on the wall for Unix. They created a team to create this new product that was going to become Solid. But they were also being pressured by the ACIS guy. So the ACIS guy was saying, "Oh, you got to use ACIS." Bill McClure, who was running the thing, had to rent an apartment somewhere in Huntsville, Alabama, have an employee come in, shake hands around the office so people couldn't deny he was there. And he would go off to this apartment and port everything to Parasolid. Similarly, when Scott was doing that exercise, Scott found that ACIS was maybe 35% to 70% for Parasolid, like 90% for PTC. Bill McClure's team found the same thing. It was more or less broken and could only do 35% of the things. Sales were going nuts because it was broken. Whereas they put in Parasolid and boom, everything just suddenly worked. So when they went to Tony and Chuck said, "You know what? We don't have a mid-range CAD solution. Instead of selling you Parasolid, just buy your company." So in fact, they'd already switched to Parasolid, and then UGS bought them. Most people think it was the other way around. They bought Solid Edge, and then they made them change. It was actually the change happened, and then they were bought.
Surprising thing I learned today. Tell me this then, how was that a shockwave in the industry that here's the engine we're all going to use or are using, and now it's been bought by a CAD company? Are we going to be out in the cold?
The Parasolid, I think UGS bought Shape Data much earlier than that, though. It was around 1985, something like that they bought Shape Data. So it was already part of UGS for a while. But the fact that it did make people think, like, what is the value of spending all the money it takes to create a graphics kernel when I can just use the one that Siemens has, or what UGS has, which is extraordinary, which is already a great kernel. Dassault decided, of course, they're French, they're going to do their own thing. PTC already had Granite, so why bother? They ended up buying Co-Create, HP's direct modeling, and let it live on. The Solid Designer lives on as Creo Elements Direct. But they also integrated that direct modeling into Creo Parametric. So now Creo is able to do both direct and parametric inside. It's interesting. Everybody arrived at different ways, but there was no way that PTC was going to change from that kernel. And it was just these newcomers, they have a decision to make. This was a decision by Mike Payne and Blake Quarter's startup Space Claim, now by ANSYS. That was on ACIS for a while until January of this year. I found a service note that they were changing the entire stack to Parasolid. So Discovery, the rebranding of Space Claim, which is now for all the products at ANSYS, the visualization platform and the CAD platform, is all based on Parasolid now.
Wow.
That was a relatively recent development.
I'll give you some trivia. What CAD company uses both IronCAD? CAD, the only one I know of. I don't know why.
The guy reached out to me because he saw my articles. He wanted to give me some more background on that. So that'll be another interview I'll do later. But yeah, IronCAD does use both. I don't know if you saw my recent...
Just a little bit about IronCAD. I want to get your opinion on this. When I first saw IronCAD, I fell in love with IronCAD. I thought, this is a really good... They had that little tri-ball thing. You could push and pull on things to make them move. I thought, wow, this is brilliant. Yeah, this was about the same time that SolidWorks was coming around. So was Iron. In fact, I remember at AutoFact, could have been Endez, where I saw one booth and I saw the other. I was more impressed with that, gotta say.
Interesting.
The first time I bet on the wrong horse. But I thought IronCAD is going to be the future. What happened with them? They never really made it.
I don't know. They never really penetrated one of the big OEMs or one of the big supply chains. Yeah. That's really what made the other three. Dassault already had Dassault Aviation, which was their mother company. So from day zero, they were an aerospace CAD, made inroads at Boeing. Siemens immediately jumped on the automotive industry in Germany, and of course, that was an easy one. PTC got into a lot of A&D accounts, Lockheed, folks like that, and a lot of luxury industries. Rolex, from the beginning, has always been a windshield, but parametric. And once they were stuck, it was really hard to get them out. I think CAD just found themselves boxed in at one point.
Sounds like a lot of them were adopted by rich parents, but CAD remained an orphan and never really prospered. What about Autodesk? Autodesk was like first CAD company on a computer, and now it's the second, third, or fourth biggest.
Fourth or fifth. It depends if you consider them a real CAD company, because they're really a BIM company. They're flagship is BIM AEC. It's not, and entertainment. That's the thing. They're a strange company, right? They've got this huge entertainment thing for which everybody knows them because of Alias, Maya, and 3D Max, and all the movies, Alias and Terminator 2, and they're the Hollywood company. And then they're also the BIM company. You can't build a building without having Revit or AutoCAD in. That's why everybody else has failed.
They kept more to their roots in architecture and making floor plans of the buildings. And as an added thing, they added a mechanical version of AutoCAD, then a mechanical desktop, and then they got...
That's when they forked the source code of ACIS after the Dassault acquisition of Spatial to do Shape Manager.
They bought the source code.
License agreement with Spatial predated that of that, because wait a second, I'm trying to remember. There was Autodesk was sued by Dassault for doing that fork in 1999, 2000, and it was thrown out of court in 2003. It didn't even go. I think it went to jury, and jury went like 3 minutes, and they said no argument. Because basically, I even talked to the guy who was behind that. It was John Owens of DQ. He was working with them doing the parametric modeling because that was his thing at DQ, and that's what Dassault tried to say. They were showing the source code to an unauthorized party, except John also had worked with Spatial. It was a spurious lawsuit that would never have happened. HP was never sued because the HP agreement to use ACE claim from the A10 back from the ROS days to for A30, and then that became Solid. That agreement predated.
Hold on, I lost you, Fino. Let me see if I can reconnect.
I'm here.
Hello. Oh, okay, you're back now. Sorry, I had a speaker function.
I think that the problem with Autodesk is that it's really hard to be great at 3 different things when you're already great at 2 of them.
The third thing would be
the MCAD stuff, the manufacturing, because they did a great job with.
They're into CG. Is that the third thing?
Number 1 would be BM. Number 2 would be media entertainment, which is Alias, 3D SMax, and Maya. And then you have this other fusion stuff, right? And a whole bunch of mold flow and a whole smorgasbord of acquisitions they made. I think what's really hard to get over, sometimes you say something and you regret it, and it's really hard to roll the tape back. And that's when Carl Bass said that PLM was worthless. He's never really, the market has never forgiven him, and maybe will never forgive him, because you just can't say that. PLM is a foundational part of the industry, and he just said, no, it doesn't matter. Because honestly, Fusion 360, there's good stuff. They also have a decent data management. Vault, really solid. Origins are from 2 different acquisitions and innovation, but there was one before. Was it Data Stay? There's another acquisition that became Vault.
Yeah.
And then, of course, they acquired, owned by a friend of mine, Johan Menghini, who had a graph database. Apparently, Johan said he'd give me an update. He's not allowed to say anything yet, but maybe in a couple of months we can have another talk, and I can tell you what Autodesk actually is doing under the covers with this smorgasbord of PLM, PDM solutions that they've got. I don't even know, because they rebranded it. It's called Autodesk Manage, the PLM piece.
The company, I follow them. They happen to be a few exits down the highway from me, so I notice them all the time.
Yes, to drive up the 101 and you see them there on the right on the hilltop, right?
Yeah,
The
exactly.
Golden Gate Bridge.
Yeah, there used to be a couple of exits away. Now they've moved to the center of the financial district, right across from the ferry building, heart of town. You haven't been
PTC did then.
exactly like PTC. You have a nice building right on the most expensive part of the city. Great view.
Next to the Salesforce one, which is sinking into the ground, right?
Yeah, next to the Salesforce Tower.
Which is now like 3 stories underground.
It's next to the Salesforce Tower. It's called the Freedom Tower, I think, and it's the leaning tower of San Francisco. I don't know if Autodesk could design that. They won't say.
Yeah, they probably have to design all the things to keep it from falling over and hitting their building, right?
Yeah, so it's a very interesting company. I give too much credit to their leadership. Like I was saying with Bernard, he's a PhD mechanical engineer. I'm a mechanical engineer.
Yeah.
You are very good. Secret. Hey, good.
For life.
Yeah, exactly. Did you get a PE as well?
No.
Yeah, that's not so important for Emmys, is it? It's more civil kind of thing. But so Bernard has a PhD. I always expected a lot from Andrew. Andrew is literally a rocket scientist. He's got degrees from Stanford in aeronautical and space engineering, I believe. And yeah, I thought maybe this was after he came in after Carl Bass. Actually, Carl Bass. Then it was Amar Paul and Andrew fighting for the spot briefly, I think for a year. And Andrew Anagnost won and he became CEO. I thought, oh, good. We got an engineer on top of a company. It's going to be great. And strangely enough, Andrew is one of these people. He doesn't listen to whatever I say. I'm just a journalist, of course. Why should he? But, engineer on top of a company, this is going to be a lot better for the mechanical side of things. But Andrew just embraced the AEC side almost, I wouldn't say exclusively, but definitely favored. That was his favorite child, was the AEC side, the BIM side. I think he saw that's where the biggest opportunity was. I don't know. He doesn't confide in me, but maybe he thought those were the guys that didn't have the technology and the bigger market for it. What's your thoughts on who the big leaders are right now in this world? Would you say it's Siemens first? And
Tony is an engineer, right? Himmelgarn, maybe the only engineer running one of these companies now, because Neil over PTC doesn't know how to spell PLM. I mean, he's a guy. Or Pascal is finance. Pascal is technical. Pascal is a brilliant person. Pascal did all that M&A, metadata, SolidWorks. He was there for all that stuff. But he's not a people person. At least he doesn't come across initially as one. And he's not a visionary. He's not a Charles. People are not going to bend over backwards and work long hours just to make Pascal happy. Whereas with Bernard, people were naming their kids after him. Yeah. So it's hard to say. I tend to hope that maybe the days of the big 3 dinosaurs will ease off, and we're going to start seeing the emergence of these smaller, more agile ones, assuming that there's a digital thread backplane to it. There's just so many awesome startups. I've cataloged 170 of them, whether they're doing BIM software and hardware or simulation software, CAD, full lifecycle. I have a database of about 107 and growing. I think that's where the future lies. And I think the real leaders are the guys in there. The guys like Brad Rothenberg of Intop, absolutely brilliant. He told me he went to one of the last COFES events and he said, I realized I was the youngest guy in the room and I was like, this is insane. This industry is just, it's got to change. The thought leaders can't all be 75 years old. There's got to be a couple of young guys that are hungry, and ladies and women especially. We need more women in the industry. So I think there's got to be some changes. I don't think it's going to stay the big 3. I think there's going to
got to be. You mentioned Brad Rothenberg there.
Adam Keating of Colab they raised, what did they just, was it 12 or 24? A pretty big number recently. So I think that they've got the amazing Israeli team of Maor at Leo AI. That was absolutely spectacular. I talked to him. He comes out with that software while he's doing his military service for Israel and having his
Yeah, amazing guy, very personal. We had him on the show, and I was quite impressed.
amazing the interactions I've had so far. He's just really exciting. And so I think those are the new leaders. Is the
It
next
seems to be
generation.
developing three tiers. The old guard, which is the company, the big four companies, I'll call them.
So where do you put Oracle and SAP then?
The overarching data monsters, where are they and all this? And then a whole lot of startups. We're already over our time, and I appreciate generosity. I know this is the history of CAD, but no conversation would be complete unless we talked about AI. I won't make this a big thing because this is the history of CAD. AI is the future. We mentioned Leo AI, and that's AI-based CAD. What is your impression of AI? Do you think it's going to take over? Do you think it's going to be a big part of it? Is it going to be the new language of
the way we design and the way we think about design and the way we think about engineering and manufacturing is going to fundamentally change.
Yeah.
Generative design is absolutely fundamental for 3D printing. We wouldn't even have 3D printing without it. I'm going to do an interview with Quantient on the 23rd of September. They're a Finnish startup in quantum computing. While discussing with them, I realized that the thing that's been holding us back from creating fusion, which, sorry, is a bit of a stretch, but you've got Jensen Huang saying the thing that holds me back is not chip design, it's power. And in the future, every product will have a physical factory for the product, an AI factory supporting the physical factory, and a power
source. Yeah.
And so you're like, oh my God, fission plants everywhere. When I mentioned that, the CEO said, don't worry, it's going to be fusion. I said, but we've been talking about fusion for 30 years. We're nowhere closer to a solution. He said, the problem with fusion is in order to stabilize the position of the plasma to do the operation, you need these insane geometries that we couldn't manufacture because you've got these moving electromagnetic fields and it's all very close to zero. And you've got this plasma. Now with generative design, we can create the geometries, print them, and do fusion. So I think in our lifetimes, we're going to see usable fusion come out, which is going to be a huge sea change. All that to say, that's just one aspect of AI, right? AI in generative design, but you're going to have AI, of course, the way that Leo uses it more, looking how engineers work and then becoming a sort of an engineering partner or engineering assistant. There's not just Leo. I know of 5 or 6 others. AI will be there also in terms of interfaces. If you think about why would a human even care about the inputs and outputs of 2 systems, and AI can just look at both of them and then connect them and do that. So digital thread, I think, will ultimately be AI exclusive. I think that the best of all worlds, it'll free up humans and engineers and mechanical engineers to, rather than spend their time doing all the plumbing and the crap of how do I get this over here and why is it the wrong format, and that's really the daily life of most engineers. We'll be spending our time doing the actual math and the actual engineering with an AI assistant. I think that's where things will go.
Do you see a world where we won't even use the actual simulation program? We'll ask AI type prompts or large LLM type prompts to interface with the software. All of that would be under the hood and we'll get the result. Could you see that as a future?
Absolutely. At one point, you're going to still need a human in the loop to check, or you're going to need a committee of agents with at least one, I call them a Maimonides agent, one agent that's, no, that's not true. Show me the proof. Go back and reprove it because I don't believe you. I think you need at least one of those, maybe a couple of them. Old Grant, you're just going to need that because I use AI almost every day and I still get 30-40% of the stuff I get back is just pure garbage. Even with GPT-5, I've gotten stuff back. So I think ultimately that's where we'll go. But how much are we going to trust it? There's going to be some more work that needs to be done to ensure that we could trust what it's coming back with. But yeah, the UIs will look like that. There's already these text to CAD apps. There's a whole bunch of startups on that. You just write in text and boom, you've got a CAD model. That's just, that's the way it's going to happen.
That's already there. Hold on one second. I lost you.
Next time I'll be in my studio with a nice mic instead of just my laptop in a rented apartment.
Fino, I'd loved having you. Thank you for sparing the time. What time is it in France?
My son and his girlfriend went off swimming, so I'll be meeting up with them to eat and then probably going to see the movie Eddington, which I heard was really good. We found there's a showing tonight.
I'll be catching up with you probably with your next in post, so I look forward to that. Fino, great having you, and thanks for your time.
My pleasure. It was entertaining for you and for your listeners.
Oh,
when you publish it, so I can socialize on my end.
All right. Hey, thanks so much. You're a great guest. That concludes this episode of the History of CAD podcast. Please join me on our next episode, and we will add to the rich history of design and engineering software. If you'd like to be a guest on this show or know someone who has stories to share, please let me know at the email address shown.